This, yeah, it just screwed my mind up.
So, it's interesting that it had this kind of effect on you. So, when you experienced these games, did it make you feel more like, wow, I want to actually do development now? Like, it started injecting your brain with, oh, I want to make stuff now? Or, did playing those games do that for you or not?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, the desire was always there, but at the time, the desire was more, like I said, it was a bit more rote. It was a bit more expected. Most of the ideas that I'd had up until then had been purely derivative, and they were well within the scope of common PC development at the time. It was, words kind of fail me in describing it, but it was all pretty much things that everyone had done before. And when I looked at console gaming, I said, this is just so completely different. I can actually come up with these new ideas and feel free to put them in a game, and by God, people actually play them. So it gave me much greater incentive to develop games. Before, it was just, okay, well, I'm making this game. I'm not really into it. I'm making it just so I can say I did make it. Whereas now, I make the games that I want to actually play. I mean, I will sit down at my lunch break sometime and, fire up a copy of Frenetic or something and just play it for a few minutes. And it's a crazy, stupid, zany idea, and I just enjoy it. So, yeah, the answer to that one is yes and no.
So, moving on, in the sake of time, Mike, you're up.
Well, I don't know. I suppose what got me into the whole game development stuff was just having playing Nintendo for so many years. I remember, I think when I was in junior high, my uncle brought along a Visual C++ 4.0 on a CD, and I was like, could I make games with that? It's like, oh yeah. So I was like, cool. And then I didn't make games with it. But, I know. I mean, one summer we would spend a week at my grandparents' house in childhood at a time. It was kind of like ransom. And one of the summers I went over there, I took a Visual Basic book with me because he had also brought several books to help me learn programming if I were to choose to do so. And so I took a couple of those over there, and I took a notebook with me. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to take notes on this programming stuff. I mean, how I thought I was going to figure anything out without having a computer to sit down and play around with it, I don't know, but I was motivated for about a day, and then I didn't touch it. So finally, a couple years after that, I did decide for real that I was going to try to figure it out, and so I learned from Teach Yourself C++ in 21 days. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that before.
Did you actually learn in 21 days how to do everything
No,
there is?
It was more like 10 days, to be honest.
And then you became a C++ genius?
Yeah, absolutely. Except for everything I didn't know yet.
Oh, I see.
No, like I only mean by that I only mean that I only went through about 10 days before either it got too complicated or decided I knew enough and I was a genius. At that point I started playing around with it and I knew enough to do what I wanted to do, and there was only so much I could do. And after that, it was more of on a need to know basis where I would pick up things here and there. But so at that point, in third year high school, I was making Lario and Code Blue, my great first RPG that lasted about a month before I suppose the way I coded back then didn't lend itself to long-lasting projects when you hard code everything,
So all of these beginning projects, they were C++? That was the first language that you started playing with?
Right.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and I just went from there, and I use mostly C++/C, whatever. I think they're the same thing, even though they're completely different, and you have people who distance themselves from one another, claiming that one is so vastly superior to the other, but I really view them as the same thing, because I'm ignorant. And I use that for... What's that?
Here comes the hate mail.
Yeah, well, whatever. My email address is mike@psychogames.com. Please don't spam me. Anyway, so I used that for several years, and then I got out of programming for a little while because I got kind of jaded.
Listen,
but
we're not talking about the history of your entire programming life. We're just talking about your foot in the door.
What?
I think your whole body is through the door right now.
Well, okay, pull me out.
All right.
You got to focus me, because I don't quite understand the topic, I suppose.
It's just how did you start? So it sounds like you just started by, I'm tinkering with C++.
Right.
So the natural thing to do is, instead of making an app, I'll just make a game. Is that kind of what happened?
Yeah, okay. That's about it. Yeah, I started playing around with C++, and I decided, well, obviously the intention the whole time wasn't to make business software, it was to make games. So.
All right, so then I guess the question we're really aiming towards is why? Like, what was going on in your brain that said, I want to learn how to use this skill to make games? What caused that to happen?
Well, like I say, it was just an inherent desire to make games. I had played games for so long, and way back in the day, I had taken out sheets of paper and drawn my Mario levels on there, and those were going to be levels that people were going to make into the game,
Yeah, so bring it back. That's what we're trying to get here. It's like, it was inherent, but at one point, there must have been a point in your life where you were playing games and you had no intention to ever make them, and that crossover had to happen somewhere. So can you pinpoint it?
Well, here's a story from way back when I was probably in the first grade. And on the bus ride home, a kid mentioned how he had a Nintendo and I should come play with him. And so I went over to his house, and maybe this is one of those points. Maybe. I was playing Mario 2, and I didn't have Mario 2, so this was cool. And he started telling me about how he made games. And this was pretty intriguing to me. And he's like, do you know the game, The Hunt for Red October? I'm like, well, no, not really. And he's like, well, I made that one. I'm like, really? And this wasn't like a programmer. This guy was in like second grade probably. So, he was really pulling the wool over my eyes pretty effectively. But, I guess that might have been one of those points where I thought, wow, you can make games, and this guy makes them. I'd like to make them someday.
There you go. Maybe that is the seedling that was planted in your brain back in first grade.
Based on a complete fabrication.
Hey, that's all right. That's pretty much how it goes.
My life is a lie.
I played that game, and it sucked.
Well, now you know why it sucked. It was made by a second grader.
I mean, if you gotta lie about something, at least say, I don't know, I made like Mario or something,
Dude, I made Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the game.
Yes, exactly.
Well, maybe the sequel.
Oh yeah.
So we'll end off this discussion with my foot getting slammed in the door. Wonderful. My game development life basically started when my older brother had a back in the days of the Atari, because my brother's a lot older than I am. He had one of the Atari computers with the blue screen where you could run. There was like this ninja game and something else. I forget what it was, but it had like an interactive shell, if you want to call it that. And he had this little bubble game where there are two bubbles on the screen, and you press a button to blow your bubble up, and you can. There are two players. Each player has a bubble on opposite side of the screen, and you can either push your bubble up or not push it up. And you basically keep going, and whoever pops their bubble first loses. But the whole point of that was, I thought that was very cool, and I was always interested. Oh man, I wonder how you do that. And that thought was kind of there, and I never really did anything about it. And a few years later, he eventually introduced me to BASIC on a Commodore 64. So, Brigham, you were correct. And I was using GW BASIC on the C64 and developing simple little things like print hello world, this is a random foobar baz, please enter your name, hello name, and all of that kind of thing. And eventually that led into, these ideas where I said, hey, I'm learning more about this language, and I can make something, more interactive. There'll be items, you can pick them up, etc. So that started me down the path of wanting to make more interactive and fun games. And a lot of the driving factor for that was I wanted to create them so that, I could impress my family and say, oh, hey, come play this thing, it's really cool. So that's pretty much how it all started, with some good old Atari programming that I never did, and then C64, and the first set of games that I created was called Void.
Do you still have the source for the Void?
For the Void games, no, I do not have the source, but they're so etched in my brain I could probably recreate them. I don't know if it's the first game or not, but in one of them, you start off in your... I can tell you the entirety of the game. You start off in your room, you move a bookcase, you get a knife, you walk outside, you move some rocks, you get a bottle, you move a little more, you use the knife to open a lock, you go inside, and you hit somebody over the head with the bottle, and you win.
What? You have a knife, but you resort to the bottle?
Yes. No, you can't use a bottle to pick a lock now, can you? You use the knife to pick the lock. And when you pick the lock, the knife is destroyed.
What?
What?
Exactly.
That
Or
is
lousy
awesome.
programming.
Dude, I need to recreate this game in a newly visualized, fully 3D world, and you'll see it'll be awesome.
Was
OpenGL.
this a graphical game or a text adventure?
It was a text adventure, but I did the awesome thing of creating funky ASCII art. So there was a little house made out of all sorts of letters and O's. And eventually, by the fourth game, I had color. That was my big advancement. Was doing color in BASIC.
Jeez, I'm glad, we're past the days where people still make games out of ASCII art.
Touche. Listen, if you don't mind, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
This may seem kind of trite because we just literally talked about it before we all jumped in here, but you mentioned that when you were a kid, you're making games, you're just trying to impress people. I mean, was there a cathartic moment where you decided that you wanted to make games for yourself, or is there still a part of you that makes games for everybody else?
That's a difficult question. I think later on, when I started learning how to actually, utilize what existed in programming languages, like once I moved to the world of C and C++ was where I made my first full game, which was Spacey Shooter, and I made that with Allegro, and it was graphical. It was like the first graphical game I made, and I think that was probably the first game I made more for myself than other people. It was probably one of those projects where I showed other people the progress I made a lot, and that kind of helped me progress forward with it. But it was one of those things where I was like, wow, I finally gotten to the point where I can make something graphical that looks like a, quote, real game did at that time. And it was mostly, I want to finish this because I want to create something that is full and complete, and it's my game, and it's the first one I did. So that was sort of like a selfish project. And then as I was moving forward, I started thinking about things like, well, that game had a very basic menu, and it wasn't really accessible to people, and it was missing a lot of the stuff that you would see in commercial games. So I think as I was moving forward, there was always that desire to do stuff for myself, but then there was that little nagging voice in the back of my head that says, you'll probably want to, make the controls like this so that if other people play it, it will make sense. Or you want to have a backstory or menus that the player can navigate through, and etc. So I think as time progresses, more and more I want to make games so other people will have the chance to experience them, but deep down inside, it's mostly just for myself because I think it's awesome.
I understand where you're coming from with that. That's I can draw a pretty strong parallel to my own experience on that, so that's good to know. I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are really just doing it for everyone else. I think there's a lot of stuff to gain, and there's a little bit of an ego that you get by saying, hey, look at that. See, I made that. That's awesome.
It's a sense of accomplishment as well.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
And, I mean, I don't know how many people would be making games if they didn't, if they didn't feel not necessarily such the sense of accomplishment, but if it weren't somewhat for themselves. I don't know if I would have much of a drive to do it if I didn't think I was getting something out of it.
Well, here's the thing. If you think about it, it's as easy as saying, would it feel as good if you developed a game and put it out there in the world and people played it and they never knew that you made it? It was just kind of this game that goes out there and it's not assigned to anyone. Your name's not there. It just exists.
Well, there would for me, myself, still have the same, the feel-good feeling about that, because you would still know that it was yours even if no one else knew.
But what if you didn't know if anyone played it or not?
If you didn't know if anyone played it or not, well, if you enjoyed the game yourself, it'd still be cool. It didn't matter as long as you enjoy your game. That's the most important part.
That just goes to show that a lot of the development is kind of, for yourself. And then it's mostly for yourself first, and then for other people second. But that might just be us here. There could be other people who it's like, I don't care if I get anything out of it. I just want other people to play it. And that could very well be the type of people who want to make a living off of it because they need other people to play it in order to, buy their ramen noodles. All right, and that wraps up the foot in the door discussion.